Welcome back to another episode of the Dylbozer's Den, and today we're going to be talking about a band that I am, again, unfamiliar with, and my two co-hosts are far more familiar with than I am, and the style of music that this band kind of falls into. I know by name, but I do not know of anything other than that. Just to give a little bit of a background, the scrams subgenre of post-hardcore or emotive hardcore or screamo, for lack of a better word. The scram stuff, from what I've gathered, loosely describes kind of the first wave with bands such as Orchid, Page 99, Ampere, things in that vein. My co-host Justin Swindle is going to see this and just face palm. To my understanding, the reason it's called scrams is to separate it from the second wave stuff, which would be more in vein of like At the Drive-In, The Used, Taking Back Sunday, at least to my knowledge. Could be very wrong in that, and I might get Carterized for that. But the band we're talking about today is Rockford, Illinois' own Frail Body, with their newest release, Artificial Bouquet, through Death Wish Records. This is the first full-length release from this band since 2019's A Brief Memoriam. I remember seeing that album when it came out. I remember seeing the cover, very recognizable cover, but I knew nothing of the band. Didn't check it out, nothing. I knew about this release coming out with the 3 singles that had been released prior to the album's actual release date, that being Refrain, Devotion, and Horizon Line. Even then, I didn't really listen to it. I finally gave this band a chance on the way back from a trip from Louisville, Kentucky with another friend of ours named Matt Graham. He had a playlist of songs of new releases that he just kind of put on so we could have something that we didn't necessarily have to like debate on what we wanted to listen to. And I believe the track I heard was Refrain, and I heard the mix of it, and I heard the aggression of it, and I heard some elements of even post metal. I heard some elements of black metal. I can't wait to dig into that a little bit more. And I knew immediately I had to check this release out. So I gave it a listen and knew immediately I wanted to do a review of it because I was so surprised and shocked that a band that was considered screamo that I would actually find enjoyable for me, because it was a genre of music that I'd kind of shrugged off, or I did not give it as much attention as it deserved. Because when the word screamo come to mind, I knew the differences between bands of like Page 99, Orchid, and stuff like The Used, which I've got over here, and Taking Back Sunday. I knew there was a wide range of bands in between there as well. But I also knew of going to shows in Bowling Green, Kentucky from like 2009 to like 2012-ish of all these great Midwest bands or these underground and DIY bands coming through on tours, playing with Justin Swindle and a mutual friend of ours named Wyatt Dunning's band called 16. And they were a 2-piece kind of Midwest emo style band. They were really into a lot of those old school screamo emo bands as well, the scrams bands. Even back then, I didn't know that you could blend multiple genres, and that's definitely what you have with the album we're reviewing. So that brings us back to the album we're talking about today. This is an album that completely swept me. I've listened to this album probably 6 to 10 times just in the last 2 weeks, and it is enjoyable every single time I listen to it. The first thing I notice is that the bass is the loudest instrument on the whole production. And what really struck me is that the bass is loud, it's distorted. It's obviously a tube amp being pushed really hard, that it's a 5-string bass. And just growing up and seeing local bands and seeing touring bands, a lot of bands will just gravitate towards a 4-string bass. They'll tune it down. Nothing wrong with that. But what I have always wanted to see were like these DIY and these more punk adjacent bands use a 5-string bass, and some of those guys just don't grab it. And I heard this in this production and was like, this is perfect. This is what I wanted to see in this style of music all along. Bassist Nick Kusinski, hopefully I got that right, does a fantastic job and a stellar job. It's almost like he's not only playing the fundamentals and supporting role, but he's playing the role of like a lead instrument. Speaking of lead lines, like a song at the back end of the record, Another Year Removed, which is an instrumental kind of segue track, he's playing lead bass guitar on that track. There are some elements to his playing that really struck me as he is highly educated when it comes to music. There's some note choices in there, but it sounds like a real human playing. It doesn't sound overproduced, and it doesn't sound like there were multiple takes. It sounds like a musician that went in, plugged in, knew exactly what he needed to play and what he wanted to play. I've focused on bass guitarists and bass players for the last few reviews, and I feel like that has kept me from speaking on the rest of the band members in any band. Lowell Schaefer, he has a grasp of chord voicings and chord progressions. It makes me firmly believe that these guys are listening to a lot of US black metal, a lot of the depressive stuff. I feel like there's Leviathan, I feel like there's Zazther in there, maybe some Krieg, it's definitely there. I don't know how far into it is, but it's definitely there. Lyrically, I wish I knew more about it. I don't pay the most attention to lyrics when it comes to extreme music. I typically just like the vocals to sound like they emote the emotion that I'm feeling at the time while I'm listening to this record. And this record gives me a lot of feelings of disdain and a lot of feelings of sadness and a lot of feelings of depression. And the vocals really emulate those feelings to me. The drumming on this is second to none, going from multiple part changes throughout each song, complementing that with not only 4 on the floor drumming, but also complementing that with extremely fast blast beats, extremely fast drumming, tons of fills. We have the opening track, Scaffolding, which is one of my favorite tracks on the record. And it's the start of it just sounds like a black metal band. It kind of sounds more so in the vein of something like Roads to Judah from Deaf Heaven. I don't think that album gets the attention it should because the album that came after it, Sunbather, was such a massive record, but Roads to Judah is still my favorite album. And this album has a lot of similarities to that style. The opening track, Scaffolding, just sets the tone of the record, but it segues right into Birth. I definitely feel like there's just blasting out the gate, but I also feel like there's some old school Converge riffs on there, stuff off of the pre-Jane Doe era, stuff from like Petitioning an Empty Sky or For Whenever Comes Crashing Down. I definitely see some of those older metalcore influences like a Coalesce or a Botch or something along those lines. Then you go into Critique Program and it just sounds like 2 separate tracks on the song. The starting of it has this great long kind of disjointed, discordant intro, and then it kicks into like a post-metal, almost Norwegian black metal-esque part that I love so much. That's kind of an overarching theme of the record is the record has all of these separate songs, but they segue so well into one another. The sequencing on this album is second to none. I really want to bring up the track Devotion. While it was released as a single, something about this track in particular, more than anything else on this record, sounds like a Celtic Frost track called A Dying God Coming into Human Flesh from the Monotheist record. I can't pinpoint why it does, but there's a definite sadness and overbearing atmosphere to it. It goes from something that sounds like that into almost like what could be ISIS if ISIS listened to punk exclusively. You could send somebody this track, show somebody this track, and this would be an ultimate representation of what this album and what post-metal would sound like to me. Runaway is a track that has all these hauntingly beautiful soundscapes playing on in the background that just sets the whole tone for the song, and then it kicks into this drone and this just wall of chaos that comes on in the back part of the song. Everything about this album is set up just the way it should be. With 5 years in between records, there's a reason that it took this long. These guys wanted this album to sound perfect, in my opinion, and they've done a fantastic job with that. The last track on the record could very well be my favorite track of the whole record. It's A Capsule in the Sediment. This song opens up with this great chord progression, like a traditional like hard rock or stoner rock kind of riff with these very great minor chords. And then there's this great drum and bass lock-in the verses that's been stuck in my head for days. It just shows how well the rhythm section works with themselves. There's so much going on in this track that you can get completely lost in it and just zone out, and all of these emotions will wash over you. I was pleasantly surprised with how much I like this album and how much I actually love this album. This is definitely going to be a high mark for my end of the year list. If you're a fan of Orchid's Chaos as me, Deaf Heaven's Roads to Judah, Touche Amore's Parting the Sea, Between Brightness and Me, and Converge, be it Jane Doe, Petitioning an Empty Sky, When Forever Comes Crashing Down. You're going to enjoy this record a lot. Also, to add to the Death Wish connection here, Converge's own and Death Wish's own Jacob Bannon did the artwork for this album. Definitely a lot in the styling of maybe the most recent collaboration Converge did with Chelsea Wolfe, the Blood Moon album. That swirling, almost hypnotic look to it. Production is handled by, I believe, 2 people on this album, a Pete Grossman and a Jack Shirley, who have worked with bands such as Weekend Nachos, Joyce Manor, Punch, and Deaf Heaven. I believe it was recorded at Bricktop Recording. I want to thank Paul, Lowell, whichever you prefer, Nick, and Nicholas on this. I also want to mention that Nick and Nicholas were or are currently in a black metal project called Decrescent. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you enjoyed this album as much as I do, because I'm gushing about it. Thank you very much for paying attention to my dumbass for rambling on like I have been for the last few minutes. Until we meet again.